Yeah, certainly unresolved, and kind of that maybe brings us to like the topic of aging that I would definitely, like to discuss. It's a super popular topic lately, both kind of in the popular media as well as kind of the scientific research with all of the headlines surrounding longevity and things like that. So just to begin, do you, in your opinion, or maybe your scientifically valid opinion, but is aging inevitable? And then what do you think might be some of the causes of aging? And we can tie in obviously some of this to NAD, but I know that there are several quote unquote theories of aging, maybe like 5 or 6 that involve many different mechanisms. But is there a current consensus on sort of what causes aging and whether or not it is, inevitable? I mean, clearly, biologically, yes, it is. We all age and time moves forward, but what are some of the main reasons, in your opinion, that are accepted maybe as the causes of aging?
Okay, well, first, I think that aging is a fundamental part of animal life, and that I'm not sure whether so-called immortal jellyfish are, truly immortal, but even, jellyfish would be sensitive to some amount of, mechanical disruption and some amount of radiation, disruption that would prevent them from repairing themselves. And what I like to think about in terms of animal life is that animals do what we do because we have a gene set that prescribes our shape and our physical, properties. So we're not, like, human beings are not capable of sustaining life at 50 degrees C. And, neither are most other animals. But if you find an animal that can live at 44 degrees C, you might be able to select for mutants that can grow at 45 degrees C. And if there are genes in that gene set that by mutation and selection will allow the critical functions to still work at 45, then you're going to be able to select for mutants that can do that. And over the course of, what is it, 500 million years of animal evolution, I don't believe that longevity has been a directly selected trait. I think that longevity is an emergent trait from things that have been selected. So what I mean by that is that animals need to be able to identify food and acquire food, avoid predation, identify mates, have reproductive success, and then protect their offspring from predation and provide food for their offspring until their offspring can achieve reproductive success and find food for themselves. That's what's selected in animal gene sets, all animals. Now, further, bonus points if the animals can do multiple cycles of reproduction. Now, there's certain male insects that can only, quote, do it once, but most animals can have the ability to find a mate, reproduce, and then either stay with that same mate and reproduce multiple times, or find another mate and reproduce. And of course, and they've propagated their gene sets for their ability to do that. Out of those multiple cycles, the ability to maintain reproductive capacity multiple times and to maintain fitness, because the animal still has to be able to find food, avoid predation, right? You get longevity out of fitness for all of the other things, right? But you don't necessarily have a direct selection for longevity. And so this was pretty well understood by evolutionary biologists through the 1980s. In fact, Michael Rose, who's a Drosophila evolutionary biologist, put it into a monograph on the evolutionary biology of aging that was published, the initial edition, in 1991, excuse me, by Oxford University Press. This has thousands of citations. This is not unknown work. And so the idea that longevity is an emergent trait and not something that was directly selected is something that was pretty well known. And then when Rose continued and did experimental work in this system using flies, he reasoned that if he wanted to get flies that could live longer than the wild type flies that he had in the lab, what he was going to have to do is keep males and females separate to something like 90% of their expected lifespan, right? 90, 95% of their expected lifespan, then mate them, and then continue to apply that selection for them to be old and still capable, right?
Right,
There's
because
never been a selective pressure on primates to do that.
yeah, because essentially, I mean, from what you're describing and from, you know, as much as I know, is that essentially once an organism is, say, past the point of reproduction, that's sort of where what evolution and selection no longer really cares. It's, you know, just survive it long enough to propagate your genes, and then after that, it's essentially, you know, you don't matter anymore.
So what comes out of Michael Rose's work when he does the fly thing is that, yeah, he can get long-lived flies by doing hundreds of cycles of this old male and old female pairing thing. And the differences in these old Methuselah flies, or these flies that live longer, are not monogenic. So what are longevity genes? They're all the genes that promote fitness. They're all the genes. For a human, it would be all of the genes that allow my circulatory system to work, that allow my heart to function, that allow me to recognize food, that allow me to chew, that allow me to get from one place to another. So all of the genes, it's not the idea that there are monogenic longevity. Now, there are sort of monogenic longevity genes. There are, in growth factor pathways, like there's loss of function mutants in IGF receptor pathway in worms, and there's the Ames dwarf mouse, which is essentially in the same pathway in mice that are long-lived. These are not fit mice. Okay, this is a dwarf mouse that can't compete with other mice. It wouldn't even be able to acquire food. Okay, so this is not an improved, you know, fitness mouse. This is a growth impaired mouse that can live a longer time due to attenuation of a, you know, growth factor pathway. And so it's not like a dominantly acting super mouse, longevity mouse. And there have been some promotional, you know, people in the field that have acted like, oh, longevity is solved. You know, we identified longevity genes all the way back from, you know, from yeast, that we find those genes in humans, and their longevity genes in yeast, and their longevity genes in animals, and there are going to be longevity genes in humans, and we have activators of these genes, and aging is a solved problem, and you don't have to age. And that stuff is just not evidence-based. The monogenic longevity genes are not dominantly acting due to what's called antagonistic pleiotropy. These mice are not fit. Some of the reports on what's called the Firco knockout mouse being long-lived, that paper basically should have been retracted. The adipose-specific insulin receptor knockout is not long-lived, even though the Ames mouse is long-lived. It's not a healthy mouse. The so-called longevity genes in yeast are not even longevity genes in both models of yeast aging. They actually failed in worms and flies. They're not really longevity genes in humans. They're not activators of those genes. And we don't understand aging as well as we would like to, but aging is a loss of resiliency, and it's a loss of the ability to repair stuff. And you need metabolism to repair everything, and entropic forces are real, and opposing entropy can be done in living things. We do live, here we are. We're not in technical violation of the second law of thermodynamics, because a Brady-Holmer is not a closed system. You take in food, as I explained earlier, the sun is part of your system. The sun is growing plants. You're either eating those plants or you're eating the animals that ate those plants, or both, and you're acquiring energy, and you're using energy to repair stuff to oppose the entropic factors. And this even allowed young Brady to increase in complexity during your development. You actually went from single-celled to a born human at 10 pounds or something to whatever you weigh now. You got more brain connections. So you opposed entropy, right? You became more complex. That required energy input, and you know, and your brain can still become more complex, but you know, there are other things in your body that you're going to discover as you age that do have a little breakdown problem. And when your vision gets worse, you know, it doesn't really get better. When when the shape of your eyeballs change, it doesn't have a way to get back to where it was, okay? And so the idea of rejuvenation is easy to say and may not be possible to do. When we can also talk about induced pluripotency and stuff like that. But aging is part of life. Aging is easy to accelerate. It's hard to slow. You know, probably the optimum diet and physical activity and not smoking and not, you know, having guns in the house and becoming vaccinated against emerging infectious diseases and polio and things that used to go around in the olden days. Those are things that will protect your genetically encoded lifespan capacity. I don't know that we can extend it. And actually, I am an optimist. I'm just not somebody that accepts things that were really disproven in yeast already and that don't fully apply to the human condition.